Alright guys, so in this video I want to continue talking about osseous tissue. So let's pick up right where we left off with these cells. These cells are actually going to, once they have produced enough of this to increase the strength and structure and support of the extracellular matrix, they're actually going to be trapped in this extracellular matrix around it. And once that happens, they actually differentiate into another type of cell. Okay. So below it, I'll draw even more cells. Something worth noting about these cells, not differentiated yet. Okay. So these cells over here are the ones that produce extracellular matrix. Is they have these processes that allow them to connect with both the cells that they differentiate into, right? So the cells that are trapped in this extracellular matrix. So I'll do my best to draw it. So these are processes right here. Should be smaller. Okay. So they have these processes that allow them to connect with the cells that they differentiate into, and the cells that they differentiate into also have processes, and also each other, and so that way they are able to communicate with one another via gap junctions. The processes can also be used to communicate with other types of cells, but I won't get into that in detail. The processes also provide communication with the extracellular matrix. These cells are going to be in little pockets inside the extracellular matrix. So they're going, so for each of these cells in the extracellular matrix, they're going to be little pockets, and as well as their processes. Their processes in them are going to be in little pockets of space where there is no extracellular matrix. So an example of that would just be like this, sort of just surrounding it. By the way, these processes are much more plentiful. I'm just drawing a couple to represent them. These cells are responsible for maintaining the bone matrix. The next type of cell I want to talk about are also differentiated from these cells over here. So the cells that produce the extracellular matrix. So they can differentiate into these cells, which respond to mechanical stress we just talked about, but they can also differentiate into other types of cells. So the other types of cells that they can differentiate into, well, first we'll talk about these cells. And these cells are going to be outside the tibia in this case, right? So line the outside of the osseous tissue, or yeah, so be sort of outside. There are going to be cells outside. Okay. And they're thought to function in maintenance and nutritional support of osteocytes. And they're thought to function in maintenance and nutritional support of these cells over here. So the cells that respond to mechanical stress. Yeah, they're thought to do that. And they're also thought to regulate the movement of calcium and phosphate into and out of, well, in this case we're talking about our tibia. So in and out. So in, out, and in. Okay. Okay. Other cells would line the inside. of the osseous tissue. Now, the next type of cell I want to talk about is also derived in the marrow. This cell, once it's been differentiated in the marrow from another cell in the marrow, so a cell in the marrow, I'll do it a bit differently so that we can tell the difference between the diagrams. So a cell in the marrow can differentiate into several different types of cells. But the important part is that it has the potential to differentiate into this type of cell that is present in osseous tissue. And this cell in osseous tissue, first it actually must be activated before it can do its primary job. And this is what the cell looks like. It's kind of like this. So it has these processes coming down. Not necessarily this many. They're just drawing this many to show that there are processes. But anyways, these cells will be near the osseous tissue. They'll be sort of on top. So in this diagram, I guess they'd be over in this area. So if I'll just extend this out, these cells would be on top, out along with these cells that I just talked about. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to resorb this osseous tissue. So because all of these cells over here, the cells I talked about earlier, are producing osseous tissue, or parts of osseous tissue, so extracellular matrix, this cell is going to resorb the parts of the extracellular matrix. Okay, and that way you're constantly producing new bone, new osseous tissue. You're constantly producing osseous tissue. So let me just show you how the process works, or generally how the process works. I won't go too in depth. Okay. So if this is the cell, so this over here would be the bone. So this over here would be the osseous tissue. Okay, the part that all this. Okay, this would be the cell. What we'd see is there would be a little cavity that starts to form around this part of the cell, around the sort of appendages of the cell, or the processes of the cell. And that's because the cell is releasing things that is breaking down extracellular matrix from these processes. So these processes are here to increase surface area and allow release of more things that can break down parts of extracellular matrix in the osseous tissue. So it will break it down, and then once it's broken down, the broken down parts of extracellular matrix will enter this cell and then exit above. So they'll enter the cell via the processes, and then they'll exit the cell via outside, so a part of the cell that's not touching the osseous tissue. And that way you are getting rid of extracellular matrix. So you're constantly producing more extracellular matrix and then destroying or resorbing extracellular matrix via these cells. Before I end the video, I just want to clarify a few things. When I said that the processes from these cells over here could communicate with the extracellular matrix as well as other cells, I did not mean also these cells over here. These cells over here can only communicate with these cells over here, as well as other fellow cells that are the same as them. Another thing I want to clarify is that these cells can differentiate into cells over here, the ones that respond to mechanical stress, cells over here, or they can also undergo apoptosis, or they can differentiate into just inactive cells. So they have several different paths, not just those that I mentioned. So they can also become inactive cells, or they can undergo apoptosis, or cell death. So that pretty much concludes this video. Thank you.